The twilight sun cast long shadows across the fjords as Ragnar Hrafnsson's hand tightened around his sword hilt. The muffled cry from the dense forest pierced the frigid evening air, mingling with the distant crackle of a village fire. His heart thundered against his ribs like a war drum as he peered into the thickening darkness between ancient pines. Something, or someone, was hiding there, watching, waiting. For an instant, the world around him seemed to hold its breath. What waited in those shadows? An enemy scout? A wounded animal? Or, perhaps, something far more dangerous? A fragment of the past that refused to stay buried? Ragnar exhaled slowly, his breath forming a pale cloud in the cold air. The sound had been barely a whisper, yet in that moment it carried the weight of fate itself, a destiny about to unfold. 24 hours earlier, dawn had broken cold and gray over the seaside settlement of Skjoldheim. Ragnar, a warrior of 28 winters, known as Raven Eyes for his keen sight and predator's silence, had risen before the first light touched the horizon. A heavy mist enveloped the wooden longhouses, where smoke from morning hearths mingled with the scent of damp earth and salt air. The thatch roofs glistened with frost as he made his way down the muddy path toward the shore. At the wooden dock, Ragnar stared at the slate-gray sea, reflecting the overcast sky like polished iron. Several fishing boats rocked gently against their moorings, creaking in the gentle swell. He knelt, running calloused fingers along the edge of his shield, checking for cracks or weaknesses in the lime-painted wood. The morning routine was as familiar to him as breathing. Mend the nets, sharpen blades, inspect armor, prepare for whatever threats the day might bring. "You're up early again, Hrafnsson," came a deep voice behind him. Sigurd Bjornsson, the clan's leader, approached with heavy footsteps. His imposing frame was wrapped in a massive bearskin cloak, the Thor's hammer amulet at his neck catching what little light filtered through the clouds. "The sea gives you no rest?" "The sea never rests," Ragnar replied, rising to his feet. "Neither should we." Sigurd nodded, his long blonde braids shifting with the movement. The pockmarks on his weathered face seemed deeper in the harsh morning light. "The council meets at midday. We need to discuss the distribution of last month's raid bounty." The mention of the raid stirred something in Ragnar's memory, a fragment that had been haunting his dreams. As Sigurd walked away, Ragnar turned back toward the water, letting the memory surface from the depths of his mind. 3 weeks ago, they had sailed south to the Saxon settlements. The attack had come at dawn, when the Christian villagers were still sleeping or at early prayers. Ragnar remembered the chaos with perfect clarity. Thatched roofs ablaze against the pink morning sky, terrified screams cutting through the clash of weapons, the sickly sweet smell of blood mixing with smoke. Their longships had returned laden with silver, grain, tools, and slaves, the spoils of a successful raid. Among the captives, one face had stayed with him. A young Saxon woman, perhaps 19 summers old, with hair the color of summer wheat despite being matted with dirt and blood. Unlike the others who wept or stared vacantly, her green eyes had burned with a quiet defiance. When the slaves were divided among the raiders, she had been given to Ulfric Svensson, a warrior whose cruelty was as legendary as his skill with an axe. Something about the exchange had left Ragnar unsettled, though he couldn't explain why. Throughout the day, Ragnar found himself distracted by the memory. As he helped repair a fishing net alongside other men of the clan, his mind kept returning to those defiant green eyes. The woman was nothing to him, just another Saxon slave, one of dozens they'd brought back over the years. Yet something about her had lodged in his thoughts like a splinter beneath the skin. "Your hands work, but your mind wanders," observed Leif, an older fisherman with a gray-streaked beard. "Did you leave your wits out on the water, Raven Eyes?" Ragnar forced a smile. "Just tired. The dreams have been strange lately." "Ah," Leif nodded knowingly. "The Norns weave strange patterns sometimes. Perhaps they're sending you a message." As twilight approached, Ragnar retreated to his modest dwelling on the outskirts of the settlement. The one-room cabin stood half-sheltered by pine trees, offering both privacy and a clear view of approaching strangers. Inside, he stoked the central hearth to life, driving back the chill that had settled in his bones. On the wall hung his father's round shield, painted blue with the image of Hrafn, the raven that gave their family its name. Beneath it lay the sword that had been in his family for 3 generations, its blade notched from countless battles. He was preparing a simple meal of dried fish and barley porridge when he first heard it, a distant sound carried on the wind. At first he thought it might be a wolf, or perhaps an injured fox, but there was something distinctly human in the cry that made the hair on his arms rise. Without hesitation, he grabbed his sword and stepped back into the cold night air. Moving silently through the trees, Ragnar followed the sound, every sense alert for danger. The forest floor was slick with fallen pine needles and patches of early frost. Overhead, stars began to appear in breaks between the clouds, casting weak silver light through the canopy. Another cry, closer now, a whimper of pain or fear. He crested a small rise and peered down into a shallow ravine. There, huddled against the base of a massive oak, was a figure so still it might have been a shadow. But shadows didn't breathe, and this one's chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow movements. As Ragnar approached cautiously, the figure startled, pressing back against the tree trunk. "I won't hurt you," he said softly in the Norse tongue, then repeated it in the broken Saxon he'd learned from previous raids. The figure, a woman, raised her head slowly. Even in the dim light, Ragnar recognized her immediately. The Saxon slave with defiant eyes. Her wrists were raw and bleeding where iron manacles had cut into her skin. One side of her face was swollen, a dark bruise blooming beneath her eye. Her linen dress was torn and soaked through from the cold ground. "You," she whispered in accented Norse, "the quiet one, from the ship." Ragnar knelt a few paces away, not wanting to frighten her further. "You escaped from Ulfric?" She nodded once, her eyes never leaving his face. "He will kill me when he finds me." There was no plea in her voice, just a statement of fact. "What is your name?" Ragnar asked, surprising himself with the question. "Eadgyth," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Daughter of Elfric." A choice crystallized before Ragnar like ice forming on still water. By all rights, he should return her to Ulfric. The slave was property, taken fairly in raid. To hide her would be to steal from a fellow warrior, a serious offense that could result in his own banishment or worse. Yet something deeper than clan law pulled at him. The bruises on her face, the raw determination that had driven her to flee into a frozen forest rather than endure another night of captivity. Ragnar extended his hand slowly, palm up, a gesture of peace. "Can you walk?" Eadgyth's eyes widened slightly, understanding the unspoken offer. She nodded again, more firmly this time. "Then come," he said, "the night grows colder." She placed her trembling hand in his, small, ice-cold, but surprisingly strong. As he helped her to her feet, Ragnar felt the weight of his decision settle across his shoulders. In that moment, between the silent trees and under the watchful stars, two worlds collided. Whatever came next, there would be no going back. The journey back to Ragnar's cabin was slow and fraught with tension. Every snapping twig or rustling branch might have been a search party. Every distant call of a night bird could have been a signal between hunters. Eadgyth stumbled several times, her strength clearly failing, but she never made a sound of complaint. When they finally reached the small clearing where his dwelling stood, Ragnar paused to scan the surroundings before quickly ushering her inside. The warmth of the hearth hit them like a physical force after the biting cold of the forest. Eadgyth stood awkwardly near the door, dripping melted frost onto the packed earth floor, her eyes darting around the single room as if searching for traps or threats. "Sit," Ragnar said, gesturing to a low wooden bench near the fire. "You need warmth." She obeyed with the automatic compliance of one accustomed to following orders, though her posture remained rigid with tension. The firelight revealed the full extent of her injuries. Beyond the facial bruising, there were rope burns around her ankles and dark marks on her neck that looked suspiciously like fingerprints. Ragnar moved deliberately, making sure she could see his hands at all times. He placed his sword well out of reach, then retrieved a small iron key from a wooden chest near his sleeping pallet. "Your wrists," he said, approaching slowly. Eadgyth extended her hands, the heavy manacles clinking softly. The iron had chafed her skin raw, and in places infection was beginning to set in. Ragnar worked the key carefully into each lock. The mechanisms designed for Saxon prisoners were familiar to him. "You have done this before," she observed quietly. "I have been on many raids," he replied, avoiding her gaze. The second manacle fell away with a dull thud onto the dirt floor. Ragnar dipped a clean cloth into a bucket of water and handed it to her. "Clean your wounds. I will find food." While she tended to her injuries, he retrieved a loaf of dark bread, a chunk of hard cheese, and a small jar of honey, a luxury he rarely indulged in himself. He placed them on a wooden plate before her, along with a horned cup filled with watered ale. "Eat slowly," he advised. "Your stomach will reject it otherwise." Eadgyth stared at the food as if it might be poisoned. Finally, hunger won out over suspicion, and she broke off a small piece of bread, dipping it carefully in the honey before placing it in her mouth. She closed her eyes briefly as she chewed, and for a moment her face softened. "Why?" she asked after swallowing. "Why help me?" Ragnar sat on the opposite side of the hearth, considering the question. Why indeed? He had participated in dozens of raids, had seen countless slaves taken. What made this woman different? "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Perhaps the gods have their reasons." She studied him with those unsettling green eyes. "Your gods or mine? Does it matter? We are both here now." Silence fell between them, filled only by the crackling of the fire. As Eadgyth ate, Ragnar noticed something he hadn't seen before, a mark on the back of her neck, visible now that her hair had fallen forward. It appeared to be a tattoo, an unusual sight on a Saxon woman. "That mark," he said, gesturing, "what does it mean?" Her hand went instinctively to her nape, covering the design. "It is nothing." "It is something," Ragnar countered. "Saxon women do not mark their skin without reason."
Eadgyth hesitated, then slowly lowered her hand. "It was placed there when I was a child. My mother said it was for protection." "May I see it?" After a long moment, she turned slightly and lifted her hair.
The design was an intricately woven serpent, its body forming an endless knot that reminded Ragnar of the patterns carved on the prow of their longships. But there was something distinctly un-Norse about it. The serpent had 2 heads facing opposite directions. "This is no ordinary protection mark," Ragnar said, a chill running down his spine that had nothing to do with the night air. He had seen similar symbols before, in the possession of Saxon wise women and seers. This is a prophecy mark. Eadgyth let her hair fall back, concealing the tattoo. "My mother said it marked me as Deerlick." "Deerlick," Ragnar repeated, unfamiliar with the Saxon word. "Chosen," she translated, or cursed. The meaning changes depending on who speaks it. She met his gaze directly. "There is a saying among my people. The child marked by the serpent brings either ruin or salvation to those who shelter her." Ragnar felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The Norns, the weavers of fate, were not to be trifled with. If this woman was indeed marked by prophecy, harboring her could bring disaster upon his entire clan, or it could be the will of the gods themselves. Before he could respond, a distant horn sounded from the direction of the settlement. 3 long blasts, the signal for gathering. Someone had discovered the slaves' escape. "They are looking for you," Ragnar said, rising to his feet. Fear flashed across Eadgyth's face. "Will you give me to them?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with consequence. Ragnar stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and shift. The sensible answer, the Viking answer, would be yes. Return the slave, maintain his standing in the clan, avoid the dangerous path this woman's prophecy might lead him down. Instead, he moved to the far corner of the cabin and pulled up a loose floorboard, revealing a small storage space beneath. "It will be tight," he said, "but they won't find you here." Relief and something like gratitude washed over Eadgyth's features. She moved quickly to the hiding place, folding her slender body into the cramped space. "I will return when it's safe," Ragnar promised, replacing the floorboard. "Stay silent no matter what you hear." He grabbed his cloak and stepped back into the night, his mind racing. The search party would come here eventually. His dwelling was isolated enough to make it suspicious if he didn't join them. He would have to play his part carefully. As he approached the village center, Ragnar composed his features into a mask of indifferent curiosity. Torches illuminated the gathering area, where most of the clan had assembled. At the center stood Ulfric Svensson, his broad face contorted with rage, the iron bracelet on his right arm gleaming dully in the firelight. "The Saxon bitch has fled," he was saying, as Ragnar joined the crowd. "She cannot have gone far. We will find her before dawn." Sigurd Bjornsson stood beside him, his expression grave. "Organize search parties. Check the shoreline first. She may try to steal a boat. Then the forest edges." His cold blue eyes swept over the assembled warriors. "A slave who escapes must be made an example of, for all our sakes." The crowd murmured in agreement. Escaped slaves were dangerous, not just for the loss of property, but for the example they set. If one could flee, others might try. Discipline had to be maintained. "I'll take the northern forest edge," Ragnar volunteered, knowing it would lead the search away from his cabin. Ulfric's dark eyes narrowed slightly. "Always eager to hunt alone, Hrafnsson?" "I track better in silence," Ragnar replied.
and my eyes see well in darkness." Before Ulfric could respond, Sigurd nodded. "Take the north, then. Ulfric, you and your men check the eastern approach. The rest of you divide into groups of 3. As the search parties dispersed, Ragnar felt Ulfric's gaze boring into his back.
The rivalry between them was old and deep, dating back to their youth when both had competed for position and respect within the clan. Where Ragnar was methodical and reserved, Ulfric was brash and quick to violence. That Sigurd favored Ragnar for his counsel had only deepened the rift. Ragnar spent the next 2 hours making a show of searching the northern forest edge, occasionally calling out as if tracking something. When enough time had passed to be convincing, he circled back toward his cabin, taking a winding route to ensure he wasn't followed. Inside, he found Eadgyth exactly where he'd left her. As he helped her from the hiding place, he noticed she was shivering violently. "The search continues," he told her, wrapping a woolen blanket around her shoulders. "But they're looking in the wrong places for now." "They won't stop looking," she said, clutching the blanket tightly. "Ulfric, he believes he owns me, body and soul." "No man owns another soul," Ragnar said, "not even a slave's." Eadgyth's gaze lifted to meet his. "Then why do your people take slaves at all?" The question was like a blade slipping between ribs, simple, direct, and finding its mark with uncomfortable precision. Ragnar had never questioned the practice of thraldom. It was the way of things, as natural as the changing seasons or the rise and fall of tides. "It is how the world is ordered," he said finally. "The strong take, the weak serve." "And which am I?" she asked. "Strong enough to escape, yet weak enough to need your protection?" Ragnar had no answer for that. Instead, he gestured to his sleeping pallet. "Rest. Dawn comes soon enough, and with it, new dangers." Eadgyth hesitated, then moved to the offered bed. "And where will you sleep?" "I'll keep watch," he replied, settling himself on the bench by the fire, sword across his knees. As the night deepened, Ragnar watched the Saxon woman's breathing slow into the rhythm of sleep. The prophecy mark on her neck seemed to mock him from beneath her tangled hair. Ruin or salvation. The words echoed in his mind like distant thunder. What had he set in motion by bringing her here? And more troubling still, why did a part of him feel that this moment had been ordained long before either of them drew breath? Morning arrived with a persistent cold drizzle that turned the village paths to mud and shrouded the surrounding forest in mist. Ragnar had dozed fitfully through the remaining hours of darkness, waking at every sound. Eadgyth still slept, curled tightly against the wall, her face finally relaxed in slumber. He moved quietly, stoking the fire and preparing a simple porridge of oats and dried berries. The familiar routine helped calm his racing thoughts. He needed a plan. Eadgyth couldn't remain hidden in his cabin forever. Sooner or later, someone would grow suspicious. A soft sound made him turn. Eadgyth was awake, watching him with guarded eyes. "You're still here," she said, as if surprised. "Where else would I be?" Ragnar asked, stirring the porridge. "I thought perhaps you'd gone to tell them where to find me." He shook his head. "If that was my intention, I wouldn't have hidden you in the first place." Eadgyth sat up slowly, wincing at what must have been considerable pain from her injuries. "What happens now?" "First you eat," Ragnar said, ladling porridge into a wooden bowl. "Then we decide what comes next." As she ate, Ragnar outlined what he knew of the search. The village was in turmoil. Missing slaves were bad enough, but Ulfric's wounded pride made the situation more volatile. Hunting parties had been out since dawn, combing the surrounding areas. They believe you've fled south, toward your homeland, Ragnar explained. That buys us some time, but not much. Why are you doing this? Eadgyth asked again, more insistently this time. You risk everything, your place in the clan, your honor, perhaps your life.
For what? A Saxon slave you don't even know? Ragnar considered the question carefully. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure himself. There had been something in her eyes when he'd found her in the forest. Not just defiance, but a fierce will to live that resonated with something deep inside him. "I've been having dreams," he said finally, "since before the raid. Dreams of a woman with green eyes, standing at a crossroads. Behind her, fire consumes everything. Before her, a path leads into darkness, but there are stars above." He shook his head. "I'm not a seer. I don't believe in visions. But when I saw you in the forest, I knew your face." Eadgyth's expression softened slightly. "My people believe dreams are messages from the other world." "As do mine," Ragnar admitted, "though I've never put much faith in such things." "Until now?" "Until now," he agreed. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Ragnar signaled for silence, motioning Eadgyth toward the hiding place. Once she was composed, he composed his features and opened the door. Leif, the old fisherman, stood outside, water dripping from his gray beard. "Sigurd summons you," he said without preamble. "The council gathers." "What's happened?" Ragnar asked, stepping outside and pulling the door closed behind him. Leif glanced around before lowering his voice. "A Saxon hunting party has been spotted to the south. Armed men, moving through the forests. Some say they're looking for something, or someone." Ragnar felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "How many?" "A dozen, maybe more. Scouts spotted them at dawn." Leif's weathered face creased with concern. "There's more. Ulfric is claiming the slave who escaped was no ordinary thrall. He says she bears a mark of power, that her people might be coming to reclaim her." The knot in Ragnar's stomach tightened. Eadgyth's prophecy mark. Ulfric must have seen it and recognized its significance.
"I'll come at once," Ragnar said, fighting to keep his voice steady. As they walked toward the village center, Ragnar's mind raced. Saxons pursuing a slave into Viking territory was unprecedented. They must believe Eadgyth was extremely valuable or important. The prophecy mark again. What power did it truly hold? The council house was already crowded when they arrived. 8 men and 2 women, the clan's elders and most respected warriors, sat in a rough circle around the central hearth. Sigurd occupied the high seat, his massive frame draped in the bearskin cloak that marked his authority. Ulfric stood nearby, arms crossed over his broad chest, dark eyes smoldering with barely contained rage. Ragnar took his place among the council members, acutely aware of Ulfric's gaze following his every movement. "The situation is grave," Sigurd began without preamble. "Armed Saxons approaching our territory can mean only one thing. They seek conflict. We must prepare for defense." An older woman with iron-gray hair spoke up. "Before we call the clan to arms, we should understand why they come. Is it for the slave girl, as Ulfric claims, or do they simply hunt in lands they believe unoccupied?" "They come for the witch," Ulfric spat. "The slave bears a serpent mark, a powerful sign among her people. I should have recognized it sooner." Murmurs rippled through the council. Witchcraft and prophecy were taken seriously among the Norse, even as they scoffed at the Christian god of the Saxons. "What kind of mark?" asked Thorald, an older warrior whose opinion carried significant weight.
Ulfric traced a pattern in the air. A two-headed serpent, coiled in an endless knot. The old Saxon who tends our thralls saw it and grew pale with fear. She says the girl is Derlik, chosen by their gods for some purpose. All eyes turned to Ragnar, whose raids into Saxon territory had given him more knowledge of their ways than most. "I've heard of such marks," he admitted carefully.
"They're rare, given only to children believed to carry the weight of prophecy. The Saxons believe such children will shape the fate of those around them." "All the more reason to find her," Sigurd declared. "If she carries power, we cannot allow it to fall back into Saxon hands." Ulfric's lip curled in a snarl. "She cannot have gone far. The forests have been searched, the shorelines patrolled. Yet she vanishes like morning mist." His gaze locked with Ragnar's. "Unless someone aids her." A tense silence fell over the council. The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but clear. "What are you suggesting, Ulfric?" Sigurd asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Only that some men might be swayed by a pretty face or the promise of power." Ulfric's eyes never left Ragnar's. "Even men who should know better." Ragnar met his gaze steadily. "If you have an accusation to make it plainly. Or are whispers and hints the extent of your courage?" Ulfric took a step forward, hand moving to the axe at his belt. "You dare question my courage, Hrafnsson?" "Enough!" Sigurd's voice cracked like a whip. "We face Saxon raiders, and you squabble like children. There will be time enough to find the slave. For now, our priority is defense." The tension ebbed slightly as Sigurd issued orders. "Double the watch, prepare the defenses, ready the warriors for possible conflict." As the council dispersed, Ragnar felt Ulfric's hatred following him like a shadow. Outside, the rain had intensified, turning the village center into a quagmire of mud and standing water. Ragnar was about to return to his cabin when a hand gripped his arm. He turned to find Svala, a shield maiden and trusted friend, her face tight with concern. "Walk with me," she said quietly. They moved toward the shipyard, where the noise of work would cover their conversation. Svala was several years older than Ragnar, her once auburn hair now streaked with silver, her face lined from years facing sea winds and battle. "Whatever you're involved in, end it now," she said without preamble. "Ulfric has been watching your cabin. He suspects." Ragnar kept his expression neutral. "Suspects what?" "Don't play the fool," Svala hissed. "It doesn't suit you. The slave, if you're hiding her, you're risking everything." "And if I were?" Ragnar asked carefully. "What would you do?" Svala's weathered face softened slightly. "I've known you since you were a boy, Ragnar. You've always had a streak of honor that borders on foolishness. But this is different. The girl is marked. Such things carry weight beyond our understanding." "You believe in the prophecy?" "I believe that some forces shouldn't be trifled with," she replied. "Whether Saxon or Norse, the gods speak through signs and portents. If the girl truly bears a prophecy mark, then her fate is already woven into the pattern of things. You cannot change it. You can only be caught in its web." Ragnar considered her words carefully. "And if the prophecy involves me? If the Norns have already decided my part in this?" Svala sighed, suddenly looking every year of her age. "Then may the gods grant you the wisdom to recognize it, and the strength to bear whatever comes." She squeezed his arm once, then turned away, disappearing into the rain. By the time Ragnar returned to his cabin, dusk was settling over the landscape, turning the persistent rain into a ghostly silver curtain.
He entered cautiously, alert for any sign of intrusion. The main room appeared untouched. The fire burned low to embers. "Eadgyth," he called softly. The floorboards shifted, and she emerged from the hiding place, her face pale with hours of confinement. "I heard someone outside," she whispered. "They circled the cabin twice." "Ulfric's men," Ragnar confirmed grimly. "They suspect." He quickly explained what he'd learned at the council: the Saxon hunting party, Ulfric's knowledge of the prophecy mark, the increasing danger.
Eadgyth listened in silence, her expression growing more troubled with each word. "They've come for me," she said when he finished. "My brother and the elders." "Your brother leads them?" She nodded. "Wulfgar is a warrior in our village. If he's come this far north—" She trailed off, her eyes distant. "The prophecy must be unfolding." "What exactly does this prophecy say?" Ragnar demanded, frustration edging his voice. "Beyond ruin or salvation?" Eadgyth hesitated, then spoke in a low, rhythmic cadence that suggested memorized verse. "When serpent-marked child stands between worlds, blood and bond shall both be tested. Ancient enemies face a common doom, unless old hatreds lie finally rested. What was stolen must be freely given, what was broken must be made whole. Then shall enemies become brothers, and the marked one claim her soul." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with portent. Ragnar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp evening air. "This is why they raided us," Eadgyth continued, "not for treasure or slaves, but to capture me. They believe I was stolen from them years ago." "Were you?" She shook her head. "I don't know. My earliest memories are of the Saxon village, of my mother and brother. But there are gaps, dreams of a different place, faces I cannot name." Her hand went to the mark on her neck. "All I know is that when your people attacked, I felt as if something long foretold was beginning." Ragnar paced the small confines of the cabin, mind working furiously. "If your brother and his men come closer, there will be bloodshed. Sigurd won't allow armed Saxons near the settlement." "And if I give myself up to Ulfric?" Eadgyth asked. "No," Ragnar said firmly. "Ulfric now understands your value. He won't return you to your people. He'll use you as a bargaining chip, or worse." A heavy silence fell between them. Outside, the rain continued its steady drumming on the roof. The situation was impossible. Keep Eadgyth hidden and risk discovery by Ulfric. Reveal her presence and condemn her to captivity or death. Try to return her to her people and potentially trigger open conflict between the clans. "There's only one path forward," Ragnar said finally. "I must speak with your brother directly." Eadgyth's eyes widened. "That's madness! They'll kill you on sight." "Not if I go under a flag of truce, and not if you give me something to prove my intentions are peaceful." She considered this, then reached into the small leather pouch she carried. From it she withdrew a simple wooden pendant carved in the shape of a cross, but with a small difference. At the center, where the two pieces intersected, was a circular hole, and within it a tiny carved serpent. "Give this to Wulfgar," she said, pressing it into Ragnar's palm. "Tell him Eadgyth of the Serpent Mark sends it as a token of trust." Ragnar closed his fingers around the pendant, feeling its smooth contours. "I'll leave at first light. The rain should cover my tracks." "And if you don't return?" Eadgyth asked softly. "Then hide until nightfall and make for the coast," he replied. "There's a small fishing boat hidden in the cove east of here. Follow the shoreline south until you reach Saxon lands." The practicality of planning seemed to steady them both, giving structure to the uncertainty that surrounded them.
As night deepened, they shared a simple meal of dried meat and the last of the bread. The domestic normality of it struck Ragnar as strangely poignant. A brief moment of peace before the storm that surely awaited them. "Tell me about your home," he said, as they sat before the rekindled fire. Eadgyth's face softened in the firelight. "It's a small village near a river. The houses are made of timber and thatch, not so different from yours, though smaller and clustered closer together. There's a wooden church with a cross that shines in the sun." She smiled faintly. "In spring, the meadows are full of flowers, blue and yellow and white. My mother used to weave them into crowns for me to wear." "And your father?" "Killed in a raid when I was small," she said, the smile fading. "Not by your people, by another Saxon clan. There's as much fighting among ourselves as there is with the Northmen." Ragnar nodded. The Saxons were not so different in that regard. Clan fought clan, brother fought brother. The cycle of violence was as old as human memory. "What of you?" Eadgyth asked. "Is there family that will miss you if—" She left the question unfinished. "My parents crossed to Valhalla years ago," Ragnar replied. "My father in battle, my mother from fever the winter after. I had a younger sister, but she was taken by the same fever." He stared into the flames. "The clan is my family now." "And yet you risk their rejection for a slave," she observed quietly. Ragnar met her gaze across the fire. "Perhaps I grow tired of the old ways, of taking what isn't freely given, of blood answered with blood until no one remembers why the fighting began." Something shifted in Eadgyth's expression, a softening, a recognition. The prophecy speaks of that. Unless old hatreds lie finally rested. "I'm no great believer in prophecies," Ragnar said, "but I believe in choices, and I choose to try a different path." As night deepened into the small hours, they prepared for what was to come. Ragnar gathered supplies for his journey: water, dried meat, a small knife that could be hidden in his boot. Eadgyth helped where she could, her movements becoming more fluid as her injuries began to heal. "If I don't return by tomorrow night," Ragnar instructed, "use this." He handed her a small flint striker. "It's simpler than the bow drill you Saxons use for fire." She took it carefully. "I pray it won't be needed." "Prayer is good," Ragnar said with a grim smile, "but preparation is better."
As they completed their preparations, a strange calm settled over them both, the peculiar peace that comes with accepting one's fate. Whatever happened next, they had made their choices and would face the consequences together. In the darkest hour before dawn, Ragnar finally allowed himself to rest, stretching out on the floor near the hearth, while Eadgyth took the sleeping pallet. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him. His mind kept returning to the prophecy and his place within it. Was he merely a pawn in some divine game, or was there meaning in his choice to help this woman? Beside him, Eadgyth's breathing had settled into the rhythm of deep sleep. In repose, with the firelight playing across her features, she looked younger, almost childlike. It was hard to imagine her as the nexus of a prophecy that might change the fate of two peoples. Yet something about her called to him. Not just her beauty or her courage, but a sense that in her he recognized something of himself. A yearning for something beyond the endless cycle of raid and revenge, taking and loss. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the shuttered windows, Ragnar rose silently and gathered his things. He paused at the door, looking back at the sleeping woman. In another life, under different stars, perhaps they might have met as equals. Perhaps they might have chosen each other freely. But that was not the world they inhabited.
Their paths had crossed in blood and fear, and whatever lay ahead would be shaped by that beginning. With a silent prayer to gods he wasn't sure were listening, Ragnar stepped out into the misty morning and began his dangerous journey to find the Saxons. The forest dripped with morning dew, every leaf and branch glistening in the weak sunlight that filtered through the overcast sky. Ragnar moved silently through the underbrush, years of hunting having taught him how to place each foot to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves.
He carried no shield, no visible weapons beyond a small eating knife. To approach armed would be to invite immediate attack. Instead, he wore a simple gray tunic and leggings, with only a light cloak for warmth. Around his neck hung a white cloth, the universal symbol for truce. He traveled south, following game trails where possible. The rain had stopped, but the ground remained sodden, making tracking difficult. Still, there were signs for those who knew how to read them. A broken branch here, a depression in the mud there, the absence of birdsong in a section of forest that should have been alive with morning calls. By midday, Ragnar had covered several miles. He paused at a small stream to drink and rest briefly. As he knelt by the water, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck told him he was no longer alone. Slowly, deliberately, he raised both hands to show they were empty. "I come under truce," he said clearly in Saxon. "I seek Wulfgar, brother of Eadgyth." For a long moment there was only silence. Then a voice responded from the trees to his right. "Stand and turn slowly, Northman." Ragnar obeyed, keeping his movements measured and his hands visible. 3 Saxon warriors emerged from the forest, bows drawn and aimed at his heart. They were dressed for war, leather armor reinforced with metal plates, helmets with cheek guards, short swords at their belts. Their faces were hard, weathered by sun and wind and battle. The one in the center stepped forward. He was younger than the others, perhaps Ragnar's age, with the same wheat-gold hair as Eadgyth, though cropped short in warrior fashion. His eyes were a darker green than his sister's, and they burned with barely contained hatred. "I am Wulfgar," he said, in thickly accented Norse. "Why do you seek me, raider?" Ragnar kept his voice steady. "I bring news of your sister, Eadgyth of the Serpent Mark." Wulfgar's expression tightened. "What do you know of my sister? Speak quickly, before my patience ends." "She lives," Ragnar said simply, "and she sent this as proof of my good faith." Slowly, he reached into his tunic and withdrew the wooden pendant Eadgyth had given him. Wulfgar's eyes widened at the sight of it. He motioned for one of his men to take the pendant from Ragnar's outstretched hand. After examining it closely, the Saxon warrior nodded to his leader. "It is hers," Wulfgar confirmed, some of the hostility leaving his posture. "Where is she?" "Safe for now," Ragnar replied, "but in danger. She was taken in a raid 3 weeks past, enslaved by a warrior of my clan. She escaped 2 nights ago and came to me for protection." Wulfgar's brow furrowed in suspicion. Why would she seek protection from one of her captors? "I was not her captor," Ragnar clarified, "and I helped her when others would not." The young Saxon leader studied him intently, as if trying to read the truth in his face. Finally, he made a sharp gesture, and his men lowered their bows slightly, not standing down completely, but no longer an immediate threat. "Continue," Wulfgar commanded. Ragnar explained the situation as succinctly as he could. Eadgyth's escape, his decision to hide her, the growing suspicion within the clan, and the imminent threat of discovery. Throughout his account, Wulfgar's expression remained guarded, but attentive. She spoke of a prophecy, Ragnar concluded, one that involves both our peoples. I believe that's why you've come so far north, risking conflict with my clan. Wulfgar was silent for a long moment, exchanging glances with his companions. Then he sighed, suddenly looking weary beyond his years. The prophecy has been in our family for generations, he admitted. When Eadgyth was born with the birthmark of the serpent, the elders confirmed she was the one foretold. She was to unite our peoples with, he hesitated, with those we once called enemies.
The Northmen, Ragnar supplied. Wulfgar nodded grimly. When your raiders took her, we knew it was part of the prophecy's unfolding. What was stolen must be freely given. But we feared for her safety, especially when we learned which clan had taken her. My clan has a reputation? Ragnar asked, though he already knew the answer. A bitter smile touched Wulfgar's lips. Your leader, Sigurd Bjornsson, is known even in our lands. And the one you call Ulfric, his cruelty is spoken of around Saxon hearths to frighten children. Ragnar couldn't dispute this. Ulfric's brutality during raids was legendary, even among Vikings who were no strangers to violence. What does the prophecy say will happen? Ragnar asked. Wulfgar hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal to a potential enemy. Finally, he spoke in the same rhythmic cadence Eadgyth had used. When the marked one stands between worlds divided, ancient blood feuds shall find their end, either in flames that consume both peoples, or in peace where broken bonds mend. The warrior with raven sight must choose between old ways and wisdom new, for in his hands the future turns, and what he decides shall prove true. Ragnar felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. The warrior with raven sight? It could only refer to him, Ragnar Raven Eyes Hrafnsson. The prophecy hadn't just mentioned Eadgyth, it had foretold his role as well. You understand now, Wulfgar said, observing Ragnar's reaction. This was ordained long before either of us drew breath. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Before Ragnar could respond, one of the other Saxons gave a low, warning whistle. In an instant, all three had knocked arrows to their bows again, aiming past Ragnar into the forest behind him. We are not alone, Wulfgar hissed. Ragnar turned slowly, his heart sinking as he saw what had alerted the Saxons.
Moving through the trees some 50 paces away were 3 figures in Norse clothing, a hunting party from the clan. They hadn't spotted Ragnar or the Saxons yet, but they would soon. If they see us together, they'll attack without question, Ragnar said urgently. And if word reaches the settlement that I've met with you in secret, then your protection of my sister will be discovered, Wulfgar finished. What do you propose? Ragnar thought quickly. Return to your camp. I'll create a distraction to draw the hunting party away, then come to you after nightfall. Bring only 2 men and build a small fire a mile south of this stream. I'll find you. Wulfgar studied him for a moment, then nodded sharply. Until nightfall, Northman. But know this, if you betray us, the prophecy speaks of flames consuming both our peoples. I will ensure that part comes true, even if I must light the fire myself. With that grim promise, the Saxons melted back into the forest as silently as they had appeared. Ragnar took a deep breath, composing himself for what came next. He had to distract the hunting party without arousing suspicion, a delicate balance.
Deliberately making more noise than necessary, Ragnar moved away from the stream in a direction that would intercept the Norse hunters. He began gathering fallen branches as if collecting firewood, humming tunelessly under his breath. It didn't take long for the hunting party to notice him. "Hrafnsson," called a familiar voice. "What brings you so far from the settlement alone?" Ragnar looked up to see Halvar, a capable young warrior, accompanied by 2 others. He forced a casual smile. "Thought I'd check the southern traps. Game's been scarce near the village." Halvar approached, his expression curious rather than suspicious. "Any luck?" "Nothing worth mentioning," Ragnar replied with a shrug. "Though I found fresh deer tracks heading east. They've been drinking at a spring over that ridge."
He gestured vaguely in the opposite direction from where the Saxons had disappeared. Halvar's face brightened. "Venison would be welcome at tonight's feast. Sigurd has called for celebration to lift spirits before potential battle." "Battle?" Ragnar asked, hoping his alarm didn't show. "The Saxon raiding party," Halvar explained. "Scouts report they've camped less than half a day's journey south. Sigurd believes they'll attack by tomorrow. He's calling all warriors back to prepare." This was worse than Ragnar had feared. If Sigurd was preparing for battle, it meant diplomacy was no longer being considered. And if fighting broke out between the clan and Wulfgar's men, any chance of fulfilling the prophecy peacefully would be lost. "I should return with you then," Ragnar said. "The deer can wait for calmer days." As they walked back toward the settlement, Ragnar's mind raced. He needed to get back to Eadgyth, warn her of the accelerating danger, and somehow still meet with Wulfgar after nightfall, all while avoiding Ulfric's suspicions and Sigurd's battle preparations. The threads of fate were drawing tighter, leaving less and less room for maneuver. The settlement was a hive of activity when they arrived. Warriors sharpened blades and repaired armor. Women prepared medical supplies and extra food. Children ran messages between groups. The atmosphere crackled with tension and anticipation, the familiar energy that preceded combat. Ragnar made his way through the chaos, stopping occasionally to exchange words with fellow warriors or help with preparations, all while working his way toward his cabin. He needed to appear engaged with the clan's defense while still tending to his secret mission. As he approached his dwelling, a chill ran down his spine. The door stood slightly ajar, when he was certain Eadgyth would have barred it from within. Moving with casual deliberation to avoid drawing attention, he approached and pushed the door open.
The cabin was empty. The hiding place beneath the floorboard lay exposed, the wooden panel tossed aside. There was no sign of struggle, but the fire had died to cold ashes, suggesting no one had been there for hours. "Looking for something, Hrafnsson?" Ragnar turned slowly to find Ulfric leaning against the doorframe, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Behind him stood 2 of his most loyal followers, their hands resting meaningfully on their weapons. "Just checking my supplies before battle," Ragnar replied evenly. "What brings you to my door, Ulfric?" "Curiosity," the darker man said, stepping inside uninvited. "I wondered why a warrior known for his devotion to the clan would miss council meetings and hunting parties, why he would search alone, away from others, why he would return from these solitary excursions with mud on his knees but no game to show for it." Ulfric's dark eyes glittered dangerously. "So, I decided to search your dwelling while you were away. Imagine my surprise when I found this." He held up a small item that caught the light, a delicate silver cross on a thin chain. Ragnar recognized it as Eadgyth's, though he hadn't known she possessed it. "Saxon trinket,"
Ulfric continued, his voice hardening. Hidden beneath your floorboards, along with fresh bread and a water-skin. Strange provisions to keep under the floor, wouldn't you say? Ragnar's mind worked furiously. Denying everything would only make matters worse. A partial truth might be his only option. The cross was taken during the last raid, he said. I kept it as a trophy. A trophy you hide rather than display, Ulfric scoffed. And I suppose the slave girl hid herself? Convenient that she disappeared just as you began your solitary excursions. What have you done with her? Ragnar asked, abandoning pretense. Ulfric's smile widened. So you admit it. You've been harboring my property, Hrafnsson. That alone is grounds for exile.
But there's more, isn't there? The Saxon raiders, the prophecy, the marked girl, it's all connected. Where is she? Ragnar demanded, taking a step forward. One of Ulfric's men drew his sword halfway from its scabbard, a warning. Ulfric himself seemed unperturbed by Ragnar's advance. Safe, he said, for now. Sigurd will decide her fate, and yours, after we deal with the Saxon threat. His expression hardened. But know this, Hrafnsson. When the battle is done and the clan's safety secured, I will see you answer for your treachery. The slave will be returned to me and you. He let the threat hang unfinished in the air between them. With that, Ulfric turned and left, his men following close behind. Ragnar stood alone in the empty cabin, the magnitude of his failure crashing over him like a wave. Eadgyth captured, the prophecy in jeopardy, war between the clans imminent, and all because he hadn't been careful enough. But there was still time, barely, to prevent disaster. If he could find Eadgyth, free her, and reach Wulfgar before battle was joined, there might yet be a chance to fulfill the prophecy peacefully. The alternative was too terrible to contemplate. Bloodshed that would engulf both peoples, with Eadgyth caught in the middle. Gathering only what he absolutely needed, a small knife, flint and steel, a water-skin, Ragnar slipped out of his cabin and made his way toward the heart of the settlement. If Eadgyth was being held prisoner, there were only a few places secure enough to keep her. The most likely was the storage pit beneath the Great Hall, which had been used to hold captives in the past. The Great Hall stood at the center of the settlement, its high timbered roof and carved pillars a testament to the clan's skill and prosperity. As Ragnar approached, he noted the guards posted at the main entrance, more than usual, and fully armed. His suspicion that Eadgyth was being held there strengthened. He couldn't simply walk in and demand to see the prisoner. He needed a pretext, a reason to enter the hall that wouldn't arouse suspicion. Fortune favored him in the form of Svala, who emerged from the hall carrying an armload of spears. "Svala," he called, hurrying to help her with the weapons. "Let me assist you." The shield maiden gave him a measured look, but allowed him to take some of the spears. "You're walking a dangerous path, Ragnar," she said quietly as they moved away from the guards. "Ulfric has been to Sigurd with his accusations. The council is divided." "I need to speak with the prisoner," Ragnar said, matching her hushed tone, "before decisions are made that cannot be unmade." Svala's weathered face creased with concern. "The girl is being held below the hall. Sigurd has ordered that no one speak with her until after the Saxon threat is dealt with." She hesitated, then added, "But there is a small window at the rear of the pit, meant for air, not escape. A determined man might speak through it, if he were careful." Ragnar felt a surge of gratitude.
"Thank you, Svala." "Don't thank me yet," she replied grimly. "The window is visible from the training yard. You'll have perhaps a few minutes at most before someone notices. And if you're caught." She left the consequence unspoken. They reached the armory, a small building adjacent to the training yard, where they deposited the spears. Svala gripped Ragnar's arm before he could leave. "Whatever you're planning, be swift," she warned. "Sigurd has called for all warriors to gather at sunset for final preparations. The attack on the Saxon camp is planned for dawn." Ragnar nodded his understanding. Time was running dangerously short. He needed to speak with Eadgyth, then somehow slip away from the settlement to meet Wulfgar, all before sunset. Moving casually to avoid attention, Ragnar circled around to the rear of the great hall.
The storage pit was built into the ground, with only a small portion visible above the surface. As Svala had said, a narrow window, little more than a slit, was set into the stone foundation just above ground level. Checking to ensure no one was watching, Ragnar knelt as if adjusting his bootlaces and leaned close to the opening. "Eadgyth," he called softly, "can you hear me?" For a moment there was no response. Then a shadow moved within the darkness, and Eadgyth's face appeared at the window, pale but unharmed. "Ragnar," she whispered, relief evident in her voice. "I feared they had killed you." "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently. She shook her head. "They've treated me well enough. Ulfric wanted harsher measures, but Sigurd overruled him. They know about the prophecy now. Ulfric told them everything." "I met your brother," Ragnar said quickly, glancing over his shoulder to ensure they weren't observed. "He and his men are camped to the south, but Sigurd plans to attack at dawn. There's no time for diplomacy." Eadgyth's eyes widened with alarm. "If blood is shed between our peoples now, the prophecy will turn dark. Flames that consume both peoples. It speaks of a blood feud that will last generations, destroying both Saxon and Norse." "I know," Ragnar said grimly. "I need to get you out of here, then reach your brother before sunset." "The pit door is barred from outside," Eadgyth said, "and even if you could open it, the guards would see immediately." Ragnar thought quickly. The situation seemed impossible, but there had to be a way. The prophecy wouldn't have brought them this far, only to fail at the final moment. "Listen carefully," he said. "When night falls, there will be a feast in the great hall, a last meal before battle. Most of the clan will attend, including the guards. That's when I'll come for you. And then? Then we find your brother and stop this war before it begins."
A noise from the training yard alerted Ragnar that his time was running out. "Be ready," he said, "and Eadgyth, trust that the prophecy has brought us together for a reason." She reached through the narrow window, her slender fingers briefly touching his. "I trust you, Ragnar Hrafnsson. The gods chose well when they wove you into my fate." With a final nod, Ragnar rose and walked away, forcing himself to move at a casual pace despite the urgency burning within him. As he rejoined the general activity of the settlement, his mind raced with plans and contingencies. The prophecy had named him as the one whose choice would determine the future. The warrior with raven sight must choose between old ways and wisdom new. The weight of that responsibility settled across his shoulders like a physical burden. Throughout the remainder of the afternoon, Ragnar participated in the battle preparations, all while watching for an opportunity to slip away and meet Wulfgar. But Ulfric had been clever. He'd arranged for Ragnar to be assigned to a group preparing defenses at the northern edge of the settlement, far from both the Great Hall and the southern forest where the Saxons waited. As sunset approached, a horn sounded, calling all warriors to the feast.
Ragnar joined the flow of men and women moving toward the great hall, his expression carefully neutral despite the tension coiling within him. Inside, long tables had been set with food and drink, a final celebration before the blood and chaos of battle. Sigurd sat at the high table, his massive frame dominating the gathering. To his right sat the clan's most honored warriors, to his left the council members. Ragnar found himself directed to a place far from the high table, a clear indication that his status had been diminished by Ulfric's accusations. Speaking of Ulfric, the dark-haired warrior sat at Sigurd's right hand, his expression smug as he watched Ragnar take his lowly place.
The message was clear. Ragnar's fall from favor was complete, and Ulfric had risen in his stead. The feast began with Sigurd rising to address the assembled clan. His deep voice carried easily through the hall, silencing all other conversation. "Tomorrow at dawn, we face Saxon raiders who dare to threaten our lands," he declared. "They come seeking something they believe we have taken, a girl marked by prophecy." Murmurs rippled through the crowd at this. "But they will find only Norse steel and Norse courage." A cheer went up from the gathered warriors, ale horns raised in salute. Ragnar joined in the gesture, though the words tasted like ashes in his mouth. This was not a battle for glory or even survival. It was a senseless conflict born of misunderstanding and old hatreds. "Tonight we feast and honor the gods," Sigurd continued. "Tomorrow we send Saxon souls to their Christian heaven." Another cheer, louder this time. As the meal progressed, Ragnar ate little and drank less, needing to keep his wits sharp for what was to come. He noted the positioning of the guards, 2 at the main entrance, 1 at each side door, and presumably 1 at the pit where Eadgyth was held. The hall was crowded, the atmosphere growing rowdier as more ale flowed. It would be easy to slip away unnoticed if he could create a suitable distraction. Fortune favored him in the form of the Skald, the clan's poet and keeper of lore, who rose to perform the traditional pre-battle songs. As all eyes turned to the performer, Ragnar seized his chance. Sliding from his bench, he moved casually toward one of the side doors, as if heading for the privy. The guard there, a young warrior named Leif, nodded to him as he approached. "Nature calls, Hrafnsson?" he asked with a grin. "Too much ale too quickly," Ragnar replied with a rueful smile. "I'll be back for the hero tales." The guard stepped aside, allowing Ragnar to pass.
Once outside, Ragnar moved quickly around the side of the hall toward the storage pit. As he'd hoped, the guard stationed there had been drawn inside by the Skald's performance, leaving the pit momentarily unattended. The pit door was secured with a heavy wooden bar. Ragnar lifted it carefully, wincing at the slight creak of wood against wood. The door swung open to reveal a set of rough steps leading down into darkness. "Eadgyth," he called softly. "Here," came her reply from below. She emerged from the shadows, moving stiffly after hours of confinement in the damp pit. Ragnar helped her up the steps, then quickly closed the door again, replacing the bar to buy them time before her absence was discovered. "We need to move quickly," he said, taking her hand. "The feast won't last forever." They skirted the edge of the settlement, keeping to shadows and avoiding the main pathways.
The night was clear, stars emerging in a velvet black sky, offering just enough light to navigate by. They encountered no one. Most of the clan was either at the feast or at their assigned guard posts, which were focused outward, watching for Saxon approach, not inward to catch escaping prisoners. When they reached the edge of the forest, Ragnar paused, listening intently for any sound of pursuit. The distant noise of the feast was the only human sound. Otherwise, there was just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the occasional hoot of an owl. "We're clear for now," he said, "but they'll discover you're missing soon enough." "Then we should hurry," Eadgyth replied, her voice steady despite the danger. "My brother will be waiting." They moved deeper into the forest, heading south toward the meeting place Ragnar had arranged with Wulfgar. The going was slow. The night was dark under the thick canopy, and they had to be careful not to leave signs of their passage that pursuers might follow.
After what seemed like hours, but was probably less than one, Ragnar spotted a faint glow through the trees ahead, the small fire Wulfgar had promised to light. He motioned for Eadgyth to wait while he scouted ahead, wary of a trap despite the tentative trust established earlier. "Wulfgar," he called softly, approaching the fire's edge, "I've brought your sister." 3 figures emerged from the shadows beyond the firelight, Wulfgar and 2 of his men, bows ready but not drawn. When the Saxon leader saw Ragnar standing alone, his expression hardened. "Where is Eadgyth?" he demanded. "If you've betrayed us—" "I'm here, brother," Eadgyth called, stepping into the circle of light. Wulfgar's face transformed with relief and joy. He rushed forward, embracing his sister tightly. For a moment they spoke rapidly in Saxon, too quick and quiet for Ragnar to follow. Then Wulfgar turned to Ragnar, his expression solemn. "You've kept your word, Northmen," he acknowledged. "For that you have my thanks." "Save your thanks," Ragnar replied grimly. "We're not safe yet. Your sister's absence will be discovered soon, if it hasn't been already, and your camp is marked for attack at dawn." Wulfgar's expression darkened. "Then we must move our people immediately." "No," Eadgyth interjected. "Running will only delay the inevitable. The prophecy must be fulfilled now, or darkness will fall on both our peoples." She turned to Ragnar, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "The prophecy speaks of a choice, your choice, Ragnar Raven-Eyes, between old ways and new wisdom. What do you choose?" The weight of the moment pressed down on Ragnar like a physical force. In his mind's eye, he saw 2 paths stretching before him, one red with blood and fire, generations of revenge and counter-revenge stretching into a bleak future. The other, uncertain, difficult, but offering the possibility of something new, peace between ancient enemies. "I choose to break the cycle," he said finally. "To try a different path." Eadgyth smiled, an expression of such hope and relief that it transformed her face entirely. "Then we must return," she said, "together." "Wulfgar," exclaimed, "to the Norse settlement? They'll kill us on sight." "Not if we go under a flag of truce," Ragnar said, the outline of a plan forming in his mind. "Not if we appeal directly to Sigurd before the battle lines are drawn." "And why would Yor listen?" Wulfgar demanded. "He has already decided on war." "Because of the prophecy," Eadgyth said, "and because Ragnar will stand with us." She looked at him questioningly. "Won't you?" Ragnar nodded slowly. "I will stand between you and my clan, if necessary. The prophecy named me as the one who must choose, and I have chosen. Now I must see it through, whatever the cost." The decision settled over the group like a mantle. There would be no running, no hiding. They would face what came next together, standing at the crossroads of 2 people's futures.
"We should go now," Ragnar said, "while the feast continues. Sigurd will be more inclined to listen before the war horns sound." Wulfgar conferred briefly with his men in Saxon, then turned back to Ragnar. "We will come, myself and 5 of my best warriors. The rest will remain camped here as security." "Bring a white flag," Ragnar advised, "and come unarmed except for eating knives. Any sign of weapons will be met with immediate attack." With grim efficiency, they prepared for the dangerous journey back to the Norse settlement. Eadgyth, caught between brother and protector, moved with a quiet dignity that belied the enormity of what they were attempting. The prophecy that had marked her since birth was coming to its culmination, and she seemed to draw strength from that knowledge. As they set out through the dark forest, Ragnar found himself walking beside her, slightly apart from the others. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. She considered the question seriously.
"Not of dying," she said finally, "but of failing, of watching both our peoples destroy each other when peace was within reach." "We won't fail," Ragnar said, with more confidence than he felt. "The prophecy has brought us this far. It won't abandon us now." Eadgyth smiled faintly. "For someone who claims not to believe in prophecies, you place great faith in this one." "Perhaps I'm beginning to see the pattern in the weave," he admitted. "Or perhaps I simply believe in you." The journey back to the settlement seemed both endless and too brief. When they finally emerged from the forest edge, the great hall was still lit from within, sounds of the feast audible even at this distance. But there was a new tension in the air, an alertness among the guards that suggested Eadgyth's absence had been discovered. "Wait here," Ragnar told the Saxons. "All approach first. Announce your coming under truce. If I signal, bring Eadgyth forward. If not, if something goes wrong, take her and flee south as fast as you can." Wulfgar clasped his arm in a warrior's grip. "May your gods and mine watch over this night, Ragnar Hrafnsson." Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Ragnar stepped out of the forest shadow and walked openly toward the settlement's edge. Almost immediately, a sentry's voice rang out. "Who approaches? Identify yourself." "Ragnar Hrafnsson," he called back. "I come with news for Sigurd." There was a moment's hesitation. Then, "Advance slowly, hands visible." Ragnar complied, walking steadily toward the sentry post. He recognized the guard, Halvar, the young warrior he'd encountered in the forest earlier that day. "Hrafnsson," Halvar said, relief evident in his voice. "Where have you been? The settlement is in uproar. The Saxon prisoner escaped, and you disappeared shortly after. Ulfric claims you freed her." "I did," Ragnar admitted calmly, "and now I've brought her back, along with her brother and a chance for peace rather than war."
Halvar's eyes widened. "Saxons? Here? Ragnar, have you lost your mind?"
"Perhaps I've found it at last," Ragnar replied. "Take me to Sigurd. Let me speak before judgments are made." Halvar hesitated, clearly torn between duty and his respect for Ragnar. Finally, he nodded. "I'll take you to him, but I can't promise he'll listen." "That's all I ask," Ragnar said. He turned and signaled to the forest edge, where Wulfgar and his men waited with Eadgyth. The small party emerged, white flag held high, moving slowly and deliberately to demonstrate their peaceful intentions. Halvar sucked in a sharp breath at the sight of armed Saxons approaching the settlement, but Ragnar laid a restraining hand on his arm. "They come under truce," he said firmly. "On my honor." The young guard nodded tightly, then turned and led the way toward the great hall. As they passed through the settlement, doors opened and people emerged to stare at the extraordinary sight, a procession of Saxons, led by Ragnar Hrafnsson, walking openly through the heart of Norse territory. Word raced ahead of them. By the time they reached the great hall, Sigurd and the council had emerged, along with most of the warriors who had been feasting inside.
They formed a grim, silent audience as Ragnar approached, Eadgyth and Wulfgar slightly behind him. Sigurd stood at the top of the hall steps, his massive frame silhouetted against the torchlight from within. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his posture spoke volumes. "Ragnar Hrafnsson," he said, his deep voice carrying easily through the night air. "You have much to explain." "I do," Ragnar agreed, stopping at the foot of the steps. "I ask for the right to speak before the council and clan, to be heard fully before judgment is passed." Ulfric pushed forward to stand beside Sigurd. "There is nothing to hear," he spat. "You betrayed your clan, stole my property, and now bring enemies to our very doorstep."
The penalty is clear. Murmurs of agreement rippled through some of the gathered warriors, but others remained silent, watching and waiting. Sigurd raised a hand for silence. "You claim the right to speak. Very well, Ragnar Hrafnsson. Speak, and make your words count, for they may be your last." Ragnar took a deep breath and began to tell the story, not just of the past few days, but of the prophecy that had brought them all to this moment. He spoke of Eadgyth's mark, of the dreams that had haunted him, of the choice that now stood before them all. "The prophecy speaks of two paths," he concluded, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed night. "One of fire and destruction, where both our peoples are consumed by hatred. The other of peace, where ancient enemies become allies. I have made my choice. I choose peace. I ask you all to do the same." A heavy silence fell when he finished. Sigurd's expression had grown thoughtful, but Ulfric's face was contorted with rage. "Prophecies and dreams," he sneered, "the words of a traitor trying to save his own skin. The Saxons are our enemies. They always have been, they always will be." And yet came a new voice, strong and clear. "Your own legends speak of a time when this was not so." Eadgyth stepped forward, her slender figure straight and proud despite the dangers surrounding her. "Your sagas tell of times when Norse and Saxon traded in peace, when marriages joined our peoples, when we fought common enemies side by side." She turned in a slow circle, addressing the entire gathering. "I was born with the mark of prophecy. My entire life has led to this moment, standing between two proud peoples, asking them to remember their shared humanity rather than their differences." A murmur ran through the crowd, not angry now, but uncertain, questioning. Even Sigurd seemed affected by her words, his stern expression softening slightly. Wulfgar stepped forward to stand beside his sister. "We come in peace," he said, his accented Norse carrying clearly, "though we could have come in war. We seek not conquest or revenge, but understanding. The prophecy that marked my sister at birth speaks of a new beginning, if we have the courage to grasp it." Ulfric's hand moved to the axe at his belt. "Pretty words from those who would see us weakened," he growled. "I say we end this farce now, and prepare for battle as planned." He started forward, axe half drawn, but Ragnar moved to intercept him, placing himself between Ulfric and the Saxons. "Stop, Ulfric," he commanded. "They come under truce flag. To harm them would dishonor us all. Stand aside, traitor, or fall with them." The tension crackled like lightning before a storm.
Warriors on both sides tensed, hands moving to weapons despite the truce. In that moment, the prophecy hung in the balance, teetering between fulfillment and failure, peace and bloodshed. Then Sigurd's voice cut through the tension like a blade. All eyes turned to the clan leader. He descended the steps slowly, his massive frame moving with deliberate purpose until he stood before Eadgyth. For a long moment he studied her face. Then his gaze dropped to the serpent mark visible at the nape of her neck. "I have seen this mark before," he said finally, his voice so low that only those closest could hear. "Many years ago, when I was no older than you are now. A Saxon wise woman bore the same design. She spoke of a time when our peoples would stand at a crossroads." His gaze lifted to meet Eadgyth's. She said that when the marked one returned to the north, the cycle of blood could finally be broken. A hush fell over the gathering. Even Ulfric seemed momentarily stunned by this revelation. "You believe the prophecy?" Ragnar asked, hardly daring to hope. Sigurd turned to him, blue eyes grave. "I believe that wisdom can come from unexpected sources.
And I believe that a warrior who would risk everything for what he sees as right deserves to be heard." He looked back at Eadgyth and Wulfgar. "As do those who would walk unarmed into their enemy's stronghold in search of peace." He straightened to his full, imposing height and addressed the entire clan. "There will be no battle at dawn. Instead, there will be counsel between our people and theirs. We will hear this prophecy in full, and we will consider what future we wish to build." Ulfric stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "You would trust the word of Saxons and traitors over your own warriors? This is madness, Sigurd." "No," the clan leader replied firmly. "Madness is continuing a cycle of violence when another path lies open before us. Madness is rejecting wisdom because it comes wrapped in unfamiliar words." He fixed Ulfric with a steely gaze. "You are a valued warrior, Ulfric Svensson, but in this your judgment is clouded by hatred and pride." Ulfric's hand tightened on his axe haft, his body tensing as if for attack. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might challenge Sigurd directly, a capital offense among the clan. Then, with a snarl of disgust, he released his weapon and stepped back. "So be it," he spat. "But when these Saxons reveal their true nature, when their treachery becomes clear, remember who stood against this folly." With that, he pushed his way through the crowd and stalked away, several of his closest supporters following in his wake. The tension in the air eased slightly with his departure, though uncertainty remained. Sigurd turned back to Ragnar, Eadgyth, and Wulfgar. "Come," he said, gesturing toward the hall. "There is much to discuss, and the night grows cold." As they followed him up the steps, Eadgyth moved close to Ragnar's side. "It's happening," she whispered, wonder in her voice. "The prophecy unfolds." Ragnar nodded, though caution still tempered his hope. "The first step only. Ulfric and his supporters will not accept this easily. But it is a beginning," she insisted, "and beginnings have power all their own." Inside the great hall, the atmosphere was tense but controlled as Saxons and Norse seated themselves at the same table, something neither would have thought possible days earlier. Sigurd called for fresh food and drink to be brought, observing the ancient laws of hospitality despite the extraordinary circumstances.
As the night deepened, the prophecy was discussed in full, its origins, its meaning, its implications for both peoples. Elders from both sides recognized elements that echoed in their own traditions, finding common ground where before they had seen only differences. By the time the first pale light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, the outlines of an agreement had been reached. There would be peace between the clans, beginning with trade and cultural exchange. Eadgyth would remain as an emissary between the peoples, teaching Saxon ways to the Norse and Norse ways to her own people. And Ragnar, whose choice had set these events in motion, found himself named as her counterpart, a bridge between worlds, tasked with helping to build something that had never existed before, true understanding between ancient enemies. As the council finally adjourned, Ragnar stepped outside to breathe the cool morning air. The settlement was quiet, most of its inhabitants having sought their beds after the long night of negotiations. But one figure waited near the steps, Svala, her weathered face showing both fatigue and wonder. "The prophecy is fulfilled, then?" she asked as Ragnar approached. "Beginning to be," he replied. "There is still much work ahead." She studied his face in the growing light. "You've changed, Ragnar Hrafnsson. Something has shifted within you." He considered this, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps I've finally understood what my father tried to teach me before he died.
That true strength lies not in conquest, but in the courage to seek a better way." Svala smiled, the expression softening her stern features. "Your father would be proud, as am I." From the hall behind them came Eadgyth, her face glowing with the triumph of the night's work, despite her obvious exhaustion. She joined them on the steps, standing close enough to Ragnar that their shoulders nearly touched. "What happens now?" Svala asked, looking between them. Ragnar glanced at Eadgyth, then out toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to burn away the morning mist. "Now we build something new," he said. "Something neither Saxon nor Norse, but a bridge between worlds." Eadgyth nodded, her green eyes bright with purpose. "The prophecy doesn't end with peace declared. It continues in the work of maintaining that peace, of helping others see what we have seen." "A worthy task," Svala acknowledged, "though not an easy one." "The worthiest tasks seldom are," Ragnar replied. As they stood together watching the new day dawn, Ragnar felt a profound sense of rightness, as if all the threads of his life had been leading to this moment, this choice, this new beginning. The prophecy had named him as the one who must choose between old ways and new wisdom. He had made his choice, and in doing so had changed not only his own fate, but the fates of two peoples. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many, he had no illusions about that. They would face them together, the warrior with raven sight and the woman marked by prophecy, standing at the crossroads of history, forging a path toward a future where ancient enemies might finally become brothers. In that quiet moment between night and day, between what had been and what might be, Ragnar Hrafnsson understood at last the true meaning of the prophecy, that destiny is not a prison, but a path sculpted by the courage of those who dare to change.